welcome Lieutenant Colonel Douglas Thornton to the stage.
Aloha. It's my honor and pleasure to introduce our next speaker, the commander of Mission Delta II, Colonel Barry Croker. Mission Delta II conducts space domain awareness operations to identify, characterize, and exploit opportunities and mitigate vulnerabilities in the national security space terrain on behalf of the United States Air Space Force, United States Space Command. Mission Delta II is headquartered at Peterson Space Force Base, Colorado, and is one of the most geographically dispersed deltas in the U.S. Space Force, with units all around the world to include the 15th Space Surveillance Squadron here at Maui. Please help me welcome Colonel Barry Croker to the stage.
Aloha. Thanks for having me here today. I'd like to begin by offering a heartfelt thanks and gratitude to the people of Maui for hosting this conference for more than 25 years and enlightening us with their culture and their beautiful traditions like we saw at yesterday's invocation. Thank you for welcoming us to your island, where we hope for an everlasting partnership with our communities. I'd also like to thank the Maui Economic Development Board and the AMOS conference host for their support in our nation's space domain awareness mission, and for their efforts ensuring that the AMOS conference promotes continued dialogue, national and international cooperation, advancements in innovation, and economic growth on the island of Maui. And finally, I'd like to honor the long-standing partnership between the Space Force and the people of Maui. May our efforts continue to improve our security and protect our way of life for many years to come. Now, but before I get into my remarks today, I'd like to take a minute to acknowledge the legacy of Miss Diana McKissick, who left us earlier this year. Diana was a frequent participant at the AMOS conference and is well known throughout the SDA community. During her career, she played a critical role in establishing the first space situational awareness sharing agreements, hosting the first international conjunction assessment workshops, and defining key norms and behaviors for satellite design, satellite operations, and international cooperation. But most importantly, Diana was an example of optimism and perseverance in the face of adversity and was beloved throughout the entire SDA community. So thank you, Diana. You've left an indelible mark on SDA and have made us all a little better in the process. So to begin today, I'd like you to consider a few scenarios that might occur in daily life. And so here, a businesswoman flies across the Pacific to a conference in Los Angeles. On her trip, she puts the finishing touches on her presentation and catches up on her personal email. Here we see a student ordering dinner from a local restaurant. He has it delivered across town by a local food delivery service. In this case, we have a local fisherman stranded after his boat lost power, being rescued by a Coast Guard vessel. And finally, here we see an avid surfer who, after carefully watching a southern swell, is able to catch the perfect wave. Does anyone see what all these have in common? Well, the answer is they are all enabled by capabilities in and from space. For a traveler, navigation signals from GPS help the pilots plot a course across the ocean, while commercial communication satellites provide high bandwidth communications in flight. For our student, timing signals from the GPS satellites also synchronize network devices across the internet and allow him not only to order, but to pay for food from the comfort of his own home. And navigation signals also from the same GPS satellites help then food to be delivered right to his doorstep. On the ocean, signals from the fisherman's EPIRB emergency beacon are received by overhead search and surveillance satellites, which help in turn relay that position to his Coast Guard rescuers. And finally, continuous data from environmental monitoring satellites allow the accurate weather forecast and sea state predictions to catch that perfect wave. So it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone here today that capabilities in space improve all aspects of our daily lives, much more than just Google Maps. But space enables machine-to-machine connections that run our utilities and infrastructure, that keep our businesses and financial systems in sync, and guide the way that we plant, grow, and harvest crops. In short, our modern way of life depends on space. And moreover, our nation's security depends on capabilities in and from space. Space capabilities are integral to nearly every system and every echelon of the Joint Force. Space-based intelligence informs our decision-making. Space-based communications connect our soldiers, our airmen, and our sailors. And space-based navigation and timing allows our precision munitions to strike targets at unmatched distance and precision. As General Saltzman has often said, space is no longer the icing on the cake, it is the eggs in the batter. So as most of you at this conference are readily aware, space has become increasingly congested. The number of annual launches, the number of payloads per launch, and the number of resident space objects continues to increase each year. And as the number of objects in space increases, so does the risk of collision and the resulting challenge of debris when it occurs. Unfortunately, some nations have exacerbated this problem through irresponsible behaviors and disregard for global norms. For example, more than half of the debris generated in 2007 by the Fenyang 1 ASAT test still exists in orbit today. And we also know that space is now a contested domain, and our adversaries recognize the asymmetric advantage that space provides, and they are actively seeking to deny the Joint Force the use of space capabilities. And even more so, our adversaries are fielding systems of their own that through the use of space can hold our Joint Force at risk at unprecedented scales and unprecedented distances. And so it was for this express purpose, to contest and control the space domain, that the United States Space Force was established. Serendipitously, 78 years ago on this day, the United States Space Force was formed because our nation recognized we needed a separate service focused on the air domain. And so likewise, a little more than 6 years ago, we had the similar realization that space was important enough to warrant its own military service. As General Saltzman described yesterday, we believe we can achieve space superiority in the space domain through the tenets of competitive endurance. The first and foremost being to avoid operational surprise, or in other words, through space domain awareness. The second tenet, denying first mover advantage, is primarily achieved through resilient architectures, which also cannot be successful without space domain awareness. And finally, the third tenet, responsible counter-space campaigning, also cannot occur without timely, actionable understanding of all aspects of the space domain. So in short, SDA is fundamental to the core purpose of the Space Force, and this in turn is the purpose of Mission Delta II. So I see the mission of Mission Delta II is to discover, understand, and maintain custody of all activities in, from, and to space. So let me tell you what that means to me. Effective SDA operations in a contested domain requires proactive curiosity. We can't simply wait until activities are detected. We must seek them out and discover them with the tenacity of a hunter looking for prey. As we say in Space Operations Command, semper venator, always the hunter. Next, effective SDA operations involve more than just detection. They require characterization, attribution, and prediction. In other words, understanding of what we discover. Then our role in the Joint Force is to ensure this understanding is shared across the appropriate echelons of command. And then once we discover and understand these activities, we must maintain custody of them as needed to support military objectives. My primary focus is on the activities of bogeys and bandits, or in other words, those who actively seek to avoid discovery and understanding. And finally, effective SDA considers all activities in, from, and to space. Orbital operations, use of the electromagnetic spectrum, status of space-related infrastructure, and reliance on space capabilities are all components. And while Mission Delta II may not be the primary source of all this type of information, we must consider all these aspects of SDA as we discover, understand, and maintain custody. Now, as I said, my job is to provide effective SDA for the Joint Force, but I need to acknowledge that SDA operations are much larger than just Mission Delta II. Mission Delta II plays a critical role in these activities, outcomes, and end states, which I'd like to highlight. I believe SDA begins with the basic activities of intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and targeting. And the data from these activities then supports things like orbital situational awareness, electromagnetic situational awareness, space infrastructure awareness, and space reliance awareness. And then these outcomes directly support the end states of command and control, battle management, mission assurance, and then further informs the intelligence cycle. Several years ago, the Space Force announced that we were doubling down on our efforts to improve and generate space domain awareness forces. We still have a long ways to go, but today I'd like to take a little chance to tell you about what we've been doing over the past year and what we've been up to lately. So to begin, some of you might have noticed we've changed our name from just Delta 2 to Mission Delta 2. And that's because last October, we redefined our Delta to fit the Integrated Mission Delta model, or the IMD model. The purpose of the IMD is to establish unity of command for mission readiness and unity of effort for capability development. Within the IMD, units responsible for mission generation, intelligence support, and cyber defense are combined with the units responsible for systems maintenance and operational enhancements, all within a given mission area. So in other words, commanders for each mission area are now given authorities and resources to solve the challenges they face in operations. So in practice, here's how we look. You might recognize the units formerly from Delta 2, namely the sensor sites at the 15th Space Surveillance Squadron in Maui, the 20th Space Surveillance Squadron in Egeland, and Det 2 at Kirtland. We've also retained the 18th and 19th Space Defense Squadrons at Vandenberg and Dahlgren, respectively. However, now we've established a 60-second cyber squadron to defend our networks, and the 2nd Sustainment Squadron to manage maintenance and sustainment activities across all the operational squadrons. The 2nd Sustainment Squadron has also been assigned acquisition authorities over near-term software pathway acquisition programs, enabling an unprecedented level of operator-developer interaction during incremental software delivery. We've already seen the benefits of this new organizational alignment through shorter capability fielding cycles, increased system reliability, and more effective sustainment logistics. On the readiness front, we've also completely redone the way that combat forces are prepared and presented to combatant commands. Earlier this year, we implemented a rotational readiness model based on distinct prepare, ready, and commit phases. The fact is, today's operational environment doesn't prepare our Guardians for tomorrow's high-end fight. And so in the prepare and ready phases, we deliberately remove operators from real-world operations. They're given advanced training, tactics employment, and exercises across the various echelons of the formation to generate the capabilities that we need. And then in the commit phase, these newly certified crews replace those doing operations and allow them in turn to reset and relearn the necessary skills for a high-end fight. On the capability front, we've been redoubling our efforts to fully optimize the performance of our fielded sensors. New logistics practices have identified and overcome critical sparing issues at the ST-85 Egeland radar. And likewise, key changes to maintenance and sustainment activities have improved the ST-20 space fence's operational availability more than 20% and mean time between critical failure by more than 75%. Working with our partners in Western Australia, maintainers of the Space Surveillance Telescope successfully completed their first primary mirror recoat, significantly improving the ability to detect small and dim targets at GEO. And moreover, we've been closely working with the program office on the Deep Space Advanced Radar, which is nearing completion, and we expect to have an early use capability coming in the coming months. On the software front, we continue to make progress towards fielding a modern services-based architecture that can scale to meet our evolving needs. Just last week, we certified Space Mission Platform at the 19th Defense Squadron in Dahlgren, marking the first time the correlation centers on both coasts had a common redundant software baseline. And this common baseline will be further bolstered in the future with the Atlas event processor, which currently is in trial period at the 18th and will be deployed redundantly to the 19th Space Defense Squadron in the next year. And then finally, I want to highlight 2 important satellite programs we recently fielded. The Weather System Follow-on Microwave, managed by Mission Delta 2, will close key gaps in ocean surface vector winds, tropical cyclone intensity, and LEO energetic charged particles. And whereas the Quasi-Zenith Satellite System Hosted Payload, QZSS, a payload on the Japanese Regional Navigational Satellite System, will help keep tabs on objects in geosynchronous orbit. It's progressing towards operational acceptance as a pathfinder for coalition operations. So as I wrap up my remarks, I'd like to revisit the scenarios I shared at the beginning of my presentation. While these scenarios might represent the lives of many different Americans, I hope they especially resonate with those of you who live and work on Maui. As many as you know, Maui is home to the 15th Space Surveillance Squadron, responsible for developing, operating, and maintaining a collection of ground-based optical SDA sensors. So in my last few minutes, I'd like to focus on the importance of the 15th, and more importantly, the contributions of the Guardians that the 15th make to the lives of those who live on Maui. The 15th is a blended unit composed of research personnel at the Air Force Research Lab and operational personnel from Space Operations Command. This unique combination allows operators to benefit from the cutting-edge science and technology produced by the developers, and for developers to solve the most pressing challenges identified by the operators. 3 years ago, the success of this model made a strong impact on General Saltzman, who went on to expand the model into the integrated mission delta concept that's employed across the Space Force today. As you know, the 15th Space Surveillance Squadron primarily operates a suite of world-class sensors atop Mount Haleakala. And the summit of Haleakala was specifically chosen for its unique physical and geographic location. The image on the right represents the sky brightness at the top versus at sea level versus atop Haleakala. The clean, dry air at more than 10,000 feet means Haleakala is #1 in the world for daytime viewing and number 3 for overall conditions, experiencing operational weather for more than 250 days of the year. And moreover, Maui's location in the middle of the Pacific provides a front row view of our nation's top security concerns, namely geostationary satellites over the Western Pacific. There is no other place in the world that gives the advantages that Maui provides. As mentioned yesterday, this 15th Space Surveillance Squadron is currently upgrading the legacy GBOS, or GEOD sensors with the updated GBOS system, similar to the one we just accepted at White Sands Missile Range. This upgraded sensor improves search and revisit rates, capability, and sensitivity. And meanwhile, technologies like the autonomous Raven sensors daily scan the geobelt and produce thousands of tracks per month. Both of these systems will help ensure the security and continued operations of high-value communications and sensing satellites in geostationary orbit. And meanwhile, world-class sensors like the 3.6-meter telescope provide unparalleled insight into adversary satellite design and capabilities. Using state-of-the-art imaging algorithms, the 15th Squadron's large aperture telescopes can resolve LEO satellites with photo quality resolution in daytime and terminator lighting conditions. Recently, we demonstrated wide area survey capability on the 1.2 and the ability to monitor objects in cislunar on the 1.6. These unique capabilities help the Space Force understand and prevent adversary actions taken against our most critical space systems. At sea level, the 15th also provides world-class performance computing at the Maui High Performance Computing Center. Aside from supporting basic and applied research conducted by all services across the department, the High Performance Computing Center recently demonstrated new ways of augmenting and automating processing of extremely large data sets generated by ground and space-based sensors. The immense computing capacity of the center results in shorter processing time and the ability to provide faster data for our nation's decision makers. And finally, the 15th Space Surveillance Squadron recently broke ground on a new dedicated facility in Kihei. This 2-story, 55,000-foot facility will provide a consolidated home for future research, test operations, and will inject valuable revenue into the local economy during construction. So in closing, the contributions of Mission Delta II, especially those of the 15th Space Surveillance Squadron, directly enable the way of life on Maui and for our nation. Space is critical to both our prosperity and our national security, and the Space Force was expressly built to maintain these interests in, from, and to space. We've made many improvements in our ability to discover, understand, and maintain custody in the space domain, and we still have many challenges we must solve together. I'm grateful for the dedication of you, fellow members of this SDA community, and your continued willingness to find solutions to our most pressing problems. Thank you for your tireless efforts. Our way of life depends on it. Semper Supra.
So we have a couple minutes for questions. Does anyone have a question in the audience? Okay, we have one question online. Sir, where do you see the future of hosted payloads and international collaboration? Do you see a future consortium in play with partners for operational SDA?
It's a great question. As many of you know, space sharing agreements is one of the, I'm not going to say easiest, because nothing is easy in international relations, but it's one of the most straightforward ways that we can build coalitions of sharing data back and forth. I think we have a long history of sharing data on the ground, and I think things like QZSS are going to show that there's great opportunities for space-based provide distinct access and distinct data that we can all use to get better in our ability to generate SDA. So I think it's a great idea.
Sir, I have one question for you. Since Mission Delta 2 is almost a year old as an integrated Mission Delta, what has MD2 learned about accelerating research and acquisitions into operations?
That's a good question, too. I think it's been fantastic. Everything we do these days, whether it be in the military, whether it be in the public sector, all revolves around software. Software is the heart of everything that we're doing. And modern software methods to incremental delivery requires that tight coupling between operations and developers so that developers understand the needs and operators can give feedback directly to the developers. Our legacy structures where we had two different organizations, one responsible for operations and one responsible for the development, created an artificial barrier between those two. And anyone who's done any time in the military knows that there's historically been a strong divide between those who generate systems and those who have to operate them. And what we're seeing is those barriers are going away. That we're understanding this is a shared problem together. We're seeing the successes in operations and we're seeing the value of development right together in the same unit. We're challenging a lot of legacy processes. We're completely redesigning the way that we test, the way that we field, the way that we ops accept. But it's all great work, and through the Mission Delta construct, we're driving the train forward.
Thank you, sir. Our time's up.
Great. Thanks, everyone.